Hello everyone, Voodoo here, and welcome to the last of my 4 tier list videos. Today we are doing the Mythic plus DPS tier list. Now, a few things before we get into it. One, utilities at an all-time high in these dungeon rankings today, especially with the 2 new affixes, Incorporeal and Afflicted. If your class has a way of dealing with those pretty easily, then you should receive a higher ranking, at least in my opinion. Where it really matters, I'll bring it up. But also, the dungeons themselves really favor a Dispel on your DPS. They really want you to have some way of dealing with it, specifically poisons and diseases. Those two are going to be running rampant. Lots of dungeons have a really nasty poison or a really nasty disease, and your DPS being able to bring that is a big bonus. Now, one final thing before we get into it is that pick the player, not the class, right? So use these tier lists as a way to inform your decision, not to make your decision. A class that is S tier, playing in the hands of a very skilled player, will certainly outperform those lower than it. But if you have a very high IO, very skilled friend or player that you're thinking of bringing to your key that is playing a lower ranked class, and their IO is high and they're skilled, they often will perform better than a flavor of the month reroller who maybe isn't as skilled or doesn't have the experience on that class. So once again, bring the player, not the class. Use the tier list to inform your decision, not make your decision. Now, with that out of the way, we'll get into it. Before we do, if you enjoy the content, like, comment, subscribe, help me out here. I do this pretty often now, and if you hit the sub, you'll see more WoW content in your feed. So with that out of the way, let's start the rankings. We're going to start with Affliction. Now, I think Affliction is going to go in the C tier here. Affliction's biggest weakness is the fact they don't really have a hybrid build. They can do good ST, they can do good AoE, they can't really do both at the same time. That's definitely a big downside. On top of that, Affliction really revolves around being able to do those large pulls. You'll see this in the MDI probably because of just some talents they have, but I'm ranking these specs based on live keys. I'm not doing this based on the MDI. So you won't really ever see those pulls in the real game. Warlock's utility survivability is very good. I just think that Affliction's damage overall is a little bit lower, and the fact that they don't really have a nice hybrid build will end up netting them down in C tier. Moving next over to Arcane Mage. I think Arcane overall is pretty strong, but I don't think their damage profile is really that conducive to Mythic Plus, especially with how strong I expect Fire Mage to be. So they bring you Lust, they're pretty survivable, they have Ice Block, but their damage is all in their burst windows, and with their new tier set, they're shifting that burst towards the end. So the way I mean by that is that their new tier set kind of gives them value after they're done their big ramp with Touch of the Magi and everything, and it's giving them more at the end of their ramp. So they already suffer from really high ramp up time, which I don't think is very good. Generally in Mythic Plus, you want all your damage to be front loaded, not kind of towards the end. So I think because of that, it's going to hamper them a bit. Also, the domination I expect of Fire Mage is kind of going to hold them back a bit. I do think they're solid overall, but I just think they're a bit worse than the classes above them. Arms Warrior, I can give A tier. I think their tier set, allowing them to kind of cleave their mortal strikes, get more damage with their deep wounds, is very strong. And overall, they have a really good damage profile, really often cooldowns, really good damage overall. I just think really what's holding them back is their lack of utility. They don't really have any way of dealing with Afflicted or Incorporeal for that matter. They don't have any long stops, they just have a stun, and that's about it. Really tanky, they bring the health shout for your party, but I think the lack of being able to deal with the two new abilities, as well as general just kind of the range dominance I expect this tier to have, lowers their utility a bit, but their damage profile, absolutely solid, very strong. I just think their utility isn't quite there to warrant an S tier ranking. Assassination Rogue, I'm going to put in B tier. They have the Rogue utility suite that's just kind of propping them up. Their tier set allows them to do like some AoE damage with Crimson Tempest doing more damage, and they do more nature after their CDs are done, so they do more nature damage. So they have enough damage there to not be in C tier. They also bring the ability to AoE silence with Garrote, which is pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty powerful. AoE silences are really strong. But all in all, I do think they're probably the worst of the Rogue specs. It's just Rogue survivability and all the skips you can do with them, all the utility with the stops and the stuns. One of the only 2 hard CCs, I guess 3 hard CCs in the game, is just so powerful that they do warrant at least a B tier. Balanced Druid is going to be our first S tier spec. I believe their AoE damage is just so crazy strong, especially in like higher keys where things are living long enough, where you can do that damage. That is just so good. On top of that, their utility is immaculate. They do stops, they do knockbacks, stuns. They have Roots, they have Off Healing, they have Rebirth, they have the Verse buff, which is probably one of the strongest buffs for M+. 3% Verse is very, very powerful. And on top of that, they have a pretty good disease, Poison Dispel. The thing is going to be important this time around. As I said, poisons and diseases are kind of the name of the game in Mythic+. So being able to spell one of those two things, very strong. So Boomy S tier. BM I'm going to put in C tier. Again, they just don't really have that much burst damage. They're very consistent, which is not really where you want to be. They can do good single target and good AoE, but I think overall they're just tuned kind of poorly compared to the rest of the specs. They also are a little bit squishy. Now, they've kind of fixed that problem a lot recently, but overall, I would say Hunters are still probably one of the squishier specs. And their damage just isn't really there to kind of compete with the upper tier specs. I'm going to leave them down in C tier. Demonology Warlock, I'm going to put in A tier. I could see this moving up to S tier. They have some of the strongest single target in the game, while also doing really, really good and respectable AoE burst damage. I just think their profile is a little bit worse than the classes they're going to rank in S tier. As well, their utility doesn't help directly with dealing with the dungeons or dealing with the new affixes. They have strong utility. Warlock has very good utility. But I think overall, they're just a step below the S tier specs. I could see this one being wrong. I could see Demo being S tier. But I think overall, A tier is a very good placement for them. They're very powerful. They're very good. I'm just not quite sure if they'll be an S tier. Again, Mythic Plus can only have 3 DPS specs. So we got to be a little bit more picky with how we rank these. Destruction, I'm going to put in A tier as well, where Demo is kind of your burst single target, burst AoE. Destruction has really good single target as well, but has a little bit better AoE profile. So it's a bit of the AoE counterpart to your Demonology Warlock. Both of them share kind of the same utility suite. It's very powerful, it's very good, but it doesn't deal with the new affixes. It doesn't help much with the new dungeons. So I do think that is a negative. They're both very tanky, very strong. Their tier set's decent enough with channeling Demon Fire everywhere. It does decent enough damage. They're just, I think, a step behind the S tier specs, like Demonology was. Next up, we have Devastation Evoker, and I honestly think Devastation Evoker is going to be one of the best specs in Mythic Plus next tier. They already had a very strong bursty damage profile, and the new tier set giving them damage on all of their spenders, as well as the recent rework to their talents, I think just really pushes them over the top into one of the highest burst damage classes in AoE in the game. Now, there is a bit of an issue with that, and they can rip threat, although I do believe that it's a little bit better than it was in the past. But altogether, Devoker brings a Poison Dispel, they bring Lust, they bring the ability to stun, knock up, and knock back. They bring a hard CC they can talent into on those certain weeks. They bring an Omni Dispel, which is the only DPS class to do so, doing bleeds. Only class that can dispel bleeds. So I think there's just a ton, I guess besides like Blessing and Protection, but whatever. But I think there's just a ton of utility they have on top of their absolutely top tier damage potential. Just makes them very, very strong and is certainly an S tier spec in my opinion. Elemental Shaman will be in B tier. I think Elemental Shaman is, of course, really strong. I think their biggest weakness is they're a bit inflexible in their damage. They have like 3 different builds they can go, like a single target AoE and a hybrid. But I think the issue with the hybrid is that it's kind of suffering on either end to try and do both. So they can't really do that AoE or that single target both like insanely well at the same time. A bit like Afflictions. I think their damage is tuned a little bit less than its tiers above them, which is why they're kind of down in B tier. And I do think that just having the one defensive of Astral Shift does put them behind a little bit. Now, of course, they have the best kick in the game. They have really good dispels. They have a Poison Cleanse totem, if they can take that, which is very powerful. And they have Hex for dealing with Incorporeal, which is strong. But I do think overall, they're just a step behind some of the other specs and deserve a B tier ranking. Enhancement I'll put up in A tier. Enhancement is basically the same as Elemental Shaman with all of their utility. They have Lust, they have Ghost Wolf for Roots, they have Hex for Incorporeal, they have Poison Cleanse Totem, they have a ton of different things there, but their damage is tuned a little bit better. Now, I don't think overall this tier will be great for melee. I think this is going to be a very range-dominated season. But Enhancement Shaman does do very good damage. It can be a bit bad in like really large target counts, like 10 plus, 15 plus. But in most of your keys, you're never going to see that unless you're in like a really highly coordinated group. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Overall, though, I think they're very powerful and definitely deserve a spot in the A tier. Feral Druid will join them up here as well. Feral has a very good AoE profile. They bring the Verse buff, which again is, in my opinion, the strongest buff in Mythic Plus, bringing you damage and damage reduction, which is crazy strong. They bring the same Boomy utility profile with knockbacks, stuns, roots. They can bring some off healing with Nature's Vigil. They can bring Roar, which isn't as useful in dungeons, but hey, I still got to mention it there. They're very survivable as well. They can do good prio damage. I think what's holding them back a bit is that they don't do very well single target damage while they're doing their AoE build. But I think their AoE build is just so strong that definitely warrants them an A tier ranking. Fire Mage is an S tier spec for sure. Their burst during combust is almost unparalleled in this game, especially with how well they work with PI. I do think this will be a Fire Mage dominated tier. Their ignite damage, which just ate a nerf, is actually like crazy strong in AoE. I know it's not that good in single target because of all the nerfs they've eaten, but in AoE they are going to be so strong with combust on a very short cooldown, absolutely just slinging spells and blowing up packs with their fire damage. Now they lose some value if the mobs die before ignite can fully spread. But in most cases, in higher keys, you're not going to hit those scenarios, and Fire will be able to just absolutely machine gun down a prio target and cleave around with your Ignite. On top of that, they're very survivable. They have Ice Block, they have a Cheat Death, they have Mage Barrier, which is strong, they have like a Knock Up, a Knock Back, they have Fire Breath. So overall, they're a very strong spec, and I do expect to see them in the S tier for the upcoming season. Next up, Frost Mage. I'm going to honestly just put down in the C tier. I think Frost Mage is fine overall. They have a good sustained profile that can do slows for tanks, allowing them to peel and kite away from enemies. Also bring 2 ice blocks, which is never bad. But all in all, I think they're just tuned poorly. Again, especially with fire just being so insanely strong, I don't think Frost will bring anything specific or unique to the table that fire doesn't already bring. So I do think C tier is fair for them. I think just numbers tuning, bump them up a bit, and they'll be good to go. Frost DK I'm going to put in B tier. Frost DK has really good burst profile now with their new tier set, giving them a ton of dragon damage. A lot of their damage will be up front on each pack, which I think is a good change for them, coming from like Breath for a long time. Overall, though, I do think their damage is just lower than the above 2 tiers. They don't really bring a ton of stuff to deal with the 2 new affixes, either Incorporeal or Afflicted, and they don't bring any Dispels, which I do think is a downside to them. Warrior and Death Knight are the only 2 classes that don't really have a way of dealing with either affix that well. Neither class has a Dispel, neither class has a long form of CC. They just have like stuns, basically. So overall, I do think while their damage is good, it could be better, and their utility is nice, but a little niche. Fury Warrior, I'm going to throw up an A tier. I think Fury Warrior is very strong as well. They bring a really strong, consistent damage profile. They do a really good burst with their tier set. Both Arms and Fury, I think, are in very similar spots. Really pretty interchangeable between the 2 of them. Good AoE, pretty good single target damage. Altogether, I think they're just pretty good. Again, though, like I just mentioned for Death Knight, they don't bring any form of CC or Dispels that can help in the dungeons or help with the new affixes. So I do think that holds them back a bit. But overall, damage profile, very good. It's just the utility holding them back a tad. So Havoc, I'm torn between. So I think Havoc could go in either A or B tier. I think their AoE damage is very good. Their single target damage definitely got better. I'm going to put them in A tier personally for 2 reasons. One, I do think they have very good priority damage while doing really good AoE damage. And 2, if you've noticed something so far, and we're not done yet, there's still some more tiers, classes to put in different places, but all of the S tier specs so far are magic based, and a lot of the A tier specs are as well. So Havoc brings that 5% damage for magic users, and I do think that is very good, and we'll see them brought quite often with a lot of the S tier specs, just for a little bit more extra damage on your higher damage dealers. Everything Boomy, Fire, and Devastation are doing is buffed by the magic damage debuff, which I do think is overall very good for Havoc, and you might see it in top comps just because of how it's buffing those ranged classes. So I think that's a good thing for it, and brings it up to S tier. Marksmanship, I'm going to put down in C tier. I like BM, I just don't think they're tuned that well, particularly for AoE. They can bring really good single target. A lot of their AoE is capped due to trick shots. They just have Volley, Wailing Arrow, and Explosive Shot that aren't. So I do think that does limit them a bit. Overall, they're a little bit squishy, sorry. To bring Lust, they have to bring their pet out, which is disappointing. And altogether, I just think they're tuned a little poorly for AoE. I think they're good in single target, but in AoE, they just don't quite get there. Outlaw Rogue will go up in A tier as well. Outlaw Rogue, I do think, has a very good, consistent cleave profile, very strong party damage while doing really like constant, strong, high AoE damage in a pack. They don't really do any damage above 8 targets, but you know, with the profile they have, that's okay. But what really pushes them up to the A tier for me is their utility profile. Rogues, again, are nearly unkillable, and they bring so many different stops, stuns, and skip potential. It's just crazy, crazy strong and really, really good. Rat Paladin I'm going to throw up in the A tier as well. Rat Paladin, since their rework, brings really, really crazy strong AoE damage. Though their single target in that build is not anything crazy or nothing to write home about, they also bring one of the only DPS poison and disease dispels, which is very important. Like I mentioned, poison and disease are the two rampant types for dispels. And then on top of that, they just bring really good utility in general. They're very tanky, very survivable, have good off healing for your party, which can definitely help out with afflicteds, help out your healer a bit. And their damage is just very strong, so A tier for them it is. We are rounding the home stretch here, and we're going to put Shadow Priest up in S tier as well. I think Shadow Priest brings a really good damage profile. Now, they got changed. The filler that was Mind Seer is removed. Instead, all their damage is Psychic Link now, and in return, they have a shorter cooldown on Shadow Cross, which means they can apply their dots more easily. I think it's like 20 seconds or something, which should mean you have it basically every single pull. On a pull where you don't, your damage will be suffering for sure, but otherwise, you're going to do a lot of prio damage and a ton of just passive cleave AoE damage, which I think is a really strong profile. They don't have to do too much extra to get that AoE damage out, and they can focus on one prio target with all their Mind Blasts and Devouring Plagues and stuff like that. I think one big thing, though, for them is the fact that they bring PI. And PI on both Fire Mage and Devastation Evoker is both really, really, really strong. And those specs both are in the S tier. Throwing PI on your Destruction Warlocks or Demonology Warlocks is also really good. Most range classes just benefit so much from PI. Shadow Priest being strong on its own and bringing the stand buff, which I think is a valuable buff in Men Plus. Plus bringing PI, I think, is really what puts it over the edge here and brings it into the S tier. Sub Rogue, for me, is going to go in the A tier. I think Sub Rogue is the best of the Rogue specs. It brings a really good burst profile in AoE, while also being able to do really good priority or single target damage, all within the same build, all at like whatever you choose. So that really there, I think, is what puts it in A tier for me. It also brings, again, all of the Rogue utility. Rogue's utility is so crazy strong for Mythic Plus that I think it being here in A tier is very warranted. Survival Hunter, I'll put in B tier as well. I think the buffs to Wildfire Bomb from their tier set actually propel Survival up into the B tier here. They bring really good single target damage, but because of the changes to their bombs, their tier set, I do think they do enough AoE damage now to warrant a B tier placement. Again, I don't think this tier is anything fancy towards melee, and Survival being a melee character is not going to help you out too much, but they bring Lust, they bring stuff like Trap, they have a immunity, which is pretty good, and overall, I think their damage profile is good. I just don't think it's anything crazy compared to the upper tier specs. I think Unholy DK is going to be in a similar tier as these ones down here. They can bring good, consistent damage, but their damage potential is only truly unlocked in a like massive AoE pulls, and you don't really see those in most keys. Like in the MDI, Unholy I think is amazing and insanely strong, but overall in like your day-to-day key, I don't think you're going to get into that environment where Unholy is going to really profit from just the kind of uncapped mass AoE they can do. They do really good damage with Army and with all their cooldowns and everything, but I do think overall they just are going to be a little bit worse than some of the other options. Finally, we have Windwalker Monk. I'm going to put Windwalker down in B. You could probably argue for A, but I think all in all, Windwalker's profile is just going to be that of AoE. Their AoE is a little weird. It's revolving around Rising Sun Kick now and some weird interactions with Touch of Death. That's where most of their damage comes from. I think their single target is really what's going to hold them back. They're going to be similar to Havoc Demon Hunter, but their buff is a lot worse than Havoc Demon Hunter's, and I do think they're also a little bit less survivable than Havoc was. So because of that, because of just kind of a few generic things, just like based on the meta, based on range classes, magic classes being so good, and based on melee being a little bit unfavored, I do think Windwalker will fall down to B tier. I think some buffs to single target, maybe some buffs to AoE could help prop them up a bit, but for now, I think B tier is a good placement for them. So these are my rankings for Mythic Plus. Now comment down below what you think. Am I wrong? Am I overvaluing some things? Am I undervaluing some things? Again, be civil about it. But with that, that is the end of this video. Again, I do want to reiterate that every spec in the game can do all the content in the game you ever desire. So don't go out there and pick Billy Bob Thornton on his BM Hunter when they're... Wait, no, I messed that up. Don't go out there and pick like a really bad person on like a Devoker just because it's quote-unquote better than the best player in the game on their BM. You know what I mean? The rankings and the difference between each of the specs isn't as big as you'd think it would be. This is just kind of a general ranking power between each one. So go out there, pick the player, not the spec. Use these to inform you, not make the decision for you. So with that, that is the end of my tier list videos. Done 4 of them. Been a little tired of them, but that is tier list week done. On Monday, I will have my Havoc Demon Hunter guide for 10.1. Looking forward to that. So subscribe, stick around if you want to see that, and I hope you guys have a great weekend and a great rest of your day. See you guys later. Peace.